Elizabeth Taylor was a child of the camera. Born in 1932 in London and whisked to California before the Second World War, she became a symbol of American beauty and cinema by the age of 12. With violet eyes, commanding talent, and an on-screen presence well beyond her years, Taylor was the very image of MGM's golden age dreams. But behind the bright lights and red carpets, Elizabeth lived another life, one marked by extraordinary pressures and the constant gaze of powerful men. John F. Kennedy, born just 15 years before Elizabeth, would go on to embody a different form of American mythology. A war hero turned senator, he was charismatic, aristocratic, and relentlessly ambitious. In public, he stood for renewal. In private, he was surrounded by secrecy. These two icons, one destined for Hollywood's Olympus, the other for the White House, briefly intersected in a moment still shrouded by time, power, and silence. According to later biographical accounts, that moment was not just shocking, it was profoundly troubling. It involved a vulnerable 15-year-old actress and a future president. This is the story of how their paths crossed, how that alleged encounter came to light decades later, and what it reveals about the culture of exploitation, complicity, and image control that defined mid-century America. At just 15, Elizabeth Taylor was already one of MGM's most valuable assets. Having starred in National Velvet at 12, she was being groomed into the perfect leading lady. Charming, photogenic, and obedient. MGM owned more than her contract. They controlled her public image, her personal schedule, and even her development as a young woman. Behind the glitz of studio publicity, however, Elizabeth was still a child, navigating fame, isolation, and the intrusion of adult responsibilities. Biographer William J. Mann, in Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon, details how the studio supervised her every move, while paradoxically placing her in situations no minor should have been exposed to. MGM, like all major studios at the time, operated a system of tightly managed illusions. On paper, Taylor was the epitome of 1950s innocence. Off the page, she was being introduced to Hollywood's most powerful men, some of whom saw her not as a protected adolescent, but as a glamorous accessory to their fame. Elizabeth was encouraged to attend adult parties, mingle with political donors, and accompany studio executives on high-profile trips. Such exposure was seen as good for business, but it also left her deeply vulnerable. In the name of publicity, the lines between work and exploitation, professionalism and grooming, were regularly blurred. This culture wasn't accidental. It was designed to protect the powerful and profit from the powerless. Elizabeth's youth didn't shield her. It made her even more appealing in a system where control and access were the true currencies. And into this world, stepping from the polished corridors of Washington's elite, came John F. Kennedy. It would take decades for the world to hear what Elizabeth Taylor allegedly endured during this time. According to several biographical sources, including conversations she reportedly had with close confidantes, the young star once shared a painful truth, that she had been the target of an inappropriate encounter with John F. Kennedy when she was just 15 years old. At the time, JFK was in his late 20s and establishing his political future as a congressman. The encounter allegedly took place at an event organized or sanctioned by MGM, suggesting that the studio was, at minimum, aware of her interactions with political elites. What should have been a harmless brush with fame, however, allegedly turned into a deeply troubling episode. Taylor reportedly confided that Kennedy made unwanted advances and engaged in a sexual act, an assertion she later referred to in passing as both confusing and exploitative. In Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon, biographer William J. Mann cites this revelation as one of many examples of how Taylor's early life was manipulated and commodified. Though Elizabeth rarely discussed the event publicly, it appeared to haunt her. According to Mann and others, it was one of several moments in her life that illustrated how powerful men treated her not as a person, but as a product. The language used in later accounts is careful, often softened by time and discretion. But the implications are clear. A teenager, already under the suffocating grip of a film studio, was further objectified by a future president. The reported incident was not framed as consensual or romantic. It was, in Taylor's own telling, a moment of coercion cloaked in luxury and political prestige. No one intervened. No one challenged it. And why would they? In that era, the careers of men like Kennedy were protected at all costs, while young actresses were seen as disposable once their beauty faded or their difficulties became inconvenient. Elizabeth's story, if true, is not just about one man's behavior. It's about a system that allowed and even enabled such conduct. It's about how MGM's control extended not just to her public image, but to her most private boundaries. And it raises a difficult question. How many other stories like hers remain untold, silenced by loyalty contracts, publicists, and the threat of exile from the industry? The golden age of Hollywood was built on illusion, not just on the screen, but in the lives of those who starred in its films. Behind the glittering facade of studio premieres and campaign stops, there existed a tightly controlled web of secrets, kept by men with power and women who had everything to lose. Elizabeth Taylor's alleged experience with JFK is not an isolated tale, but emblematic of a broader culture in which misconduct was ignored, minimized, or rationalized. Publicists, agents, and studio executives played a crucial role in covering up scandals. Rumors were suppressed with money, threats, or calculated distractions. And when it came to figures like John F. Kennedy, the machinery of political image-making was just as invested in concealment. Kennedy himself was long rumored to have had numerous affairs, some consensual, others deeply questionable. Yet for decades, mainstream media refrained from reporting on his private life. The White House press corps knew about his indiscretions, but chose not to publish them. His marriage to Jacqueline was mythologized, and his charisma shielded him from the scrutiny faced by lesser men. Similarly, MGM and studios like it knew how to bury stories that could tarnish their stars or the powerful men associated with them. Young actresses were assigned watchers and fixers to guide them through their public appearances, but these handlers often functioned as enforcers, ensuring silence rather than safety. In this environment, even egregious behavior could be normalized. If a teenage girl was mistreated, it could be reframed as an affair or a misunderstanding. And if the man involved was a senator or a studio head, the conclusion was foregone. Protect the man, rebrand the girl, move on. This silence was not born of ignorance. It was the cost of doing business. And in the process, women like Elizabeth Taylor were both celebrated and sacrificed. That culture of complicity, of powerful men shielded by reputation and institution, did not end in the 1950s. It simply evolved. And it still raises the same questions. Who gets protected? Who gets heard? And what happens when the truth no longer fits the narrative? Elizabeth Taylor's life was filled with drama, resilience, and transformation. She dazzled the world, but behind the diamonds and applause was a young girl shaped by a system that both exalted and exploited her. Her alleged encounter with John F. Kennedy is not just a footnote. It is a window into the darker currents that ran beneath Hollywood's golden surface and Washington's shining image. Fame, in that era, was a double-edged sword. It protected the predators, and it exposed the vulnerable. As we reconsider the past with clearer eyes, we must do more than remember scandals. We must understand the systems that created them and the voices that were silenced in the process. Elizabeth Taylor was not just a survivor of tabloid headlines. She was a survivor of something far more insidious, the belief that power justifies silence. So we end with a question. How many more stories remain buried beneath the lights of Hollywood and the shadows of politics? If you found this story worth telling, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. These are the stories that shaped the stars, and the silence we must continue to break.